She said her meltdowns were trauma but then screamed for an hour over who gets to drive the car. She was high, she wanted to drive, and she was screaming and kicking like the world was ending because I told her no. That is where this story starts. Not at some dramatic breakup, not at some big life-changing moment. Just a regular night, a party, and a girlfriend who completely lost it because I wanted to be the one behind the wheel. And here is the thing that really gets me. She was the one who had taken something. She was the one who was not in any condition to operate a vehicle. All I did was say, "Hey, I am sober, I should drive us home." That is it. That is the entire ask. For words, give or take. A completely reasonable, obvious, almost boring suggestion that any rational person would agree with without a second thought. And somehow, in the span of about 30 seconds, that turned into a full-blown meltdown. Crying, kicking, screaming, the whole production. And I am standing there in the driveway of someone else's house, probably with people watching from the windows, genuinely wondering what reality I stepped into and how I ended up being the villain of this particular scene. So let me back up and tell you exactly who this person is, because this was not some one-time thing. This was not a bad night after a rough week. This was not a stress response that came out of nowhere and caught everyone by surprise. This was a pattern. A consistent, reliable, utterly exhausting pattern that played out every single time they got together. Not occasionally. Not sometimes when things got stressful. Every single time. Something did not go the way she wanted, the switch flipped and it was like a completely different person showed up at the table. The warmth vanished. The reasonableness evaporated. Whatever version of her had seemed charming and fun just moments earlier disappeared, and in her place was someone unrecognizable. And our poster, a 27-year-old woman who was clearly worn out and just trying to make sense of her own life, had been watching this exact pattern repeat over and over again for just over a month of dating. Now a month is not very long. But you know what, a month is actually long enough to see someone's patterns. Long enough to watch how they handle frustration when they do not get their way. Long enough to see whether the person you are dating treats disagreements like an adult who is capable of compromise or like a toddler who just got their favorite toy taken away with no warning or explanation. A month is enough time to notice whether someone's behavior makes you feel safe or whether it makes you feel like you are always one wrong word away from chaos. And what our poster was seeing, sitting with that knowledge and turning it over in her mind, was not looking good at all. The girlfriend's explanation, when she finally offered one, was that this behavior comes from trauma. Specifically from her father, who she says was controlling. And look, I want to be careful here because trauma is real. The way a parent treats you when you are young absolutely shapes how you respond to things later in life. The nervous system learns what safety looks like and what danger looks like, and sometimes it gets those signals scrambled when it is still developing. A controlling parent can teach a child that any attempt to limit their choices is an attack, that any authority figure who says no is a threat, that the only way to survive is to push back as hard as possible before someone takes something away from you. That is not made up. That is psychology. That is just how human development works. And I am not going to sit here and say her past pain does not matter, because it probably does. But here is where it gets complicated, and where our poster is absolutely right to be skeptical. Trauma explains behavior. It does not excuse it. And it especially does not excuse behavior that puts other people in physical danger. Because we are not talking about someone crying at an unexpected moment, or shutting down during a hard conversation, or needing extra reassurance in situations that feel like rejection. We are talking about someone who voluntarily took a substance at a party, was visibly not in any condition to get behind the wheel, and then had a screaming meltdown when her sober girlfriend gently said, "I should be the one to drive." Those are not the same thing. Not even close. One is a person struggling with the emotional echoes of a painful childhood. The other is a person in an altered state demanding control of a vehicle and screaming at the one person trying to keep them both alive. And the thing that really stands out to me in this story is how the situation actually got resolved. Because it did not get resolved through patience or through the right words or through our poster finding some perfect way to get through to her. Talking did not work. Explaining did not work. Staying calm did not work. The screaming just kept going, filling up the air, drawing attention, burning up everyone's energy. It was only when someone else at the party, a third party with absolutely no personal investment in the outcome, stepped in and said the exact same thing our poster had already been saying, that she finally stopped and listened. Let that sit for a moment. She would not hear it from her own girlfriend. The person she is supposed to trust, the person she chose to be with, the person standing right there being reasonable and calm and genuinely looking out for her well-being. But she would hear it from a stranger at a party. What does that tell you about how she actually views this relationship and the person she is in it with? What it tells me is that the girlfriend is not just having trauma responses. She is also deeply accustomed to getting her own way, and those two things can absolutely coexist in the same person. You can have genuine pain from your past and also have developed, over years of reinforcement, a pattern where meltdowns are the tool you reach for when you want something. Because if meltdowns never worked, people would eventually stop using them. But if every time you kick and scream you end up getting what you want, or at minimum you become such an overwhelming storm of emotion that everyone around you either gives in or backs down just to make the noise stop, then you have learned something powerful. Even if you learned it unconsciously. Even if you genuinely believe you have no control over it. Okay, but wait. She took something before driving. At a party. And then got angry at the sober person for wanting to drive. I just need to say that out loud one more time. Let me also talk about what happened when our poster tried to address this head-on, because this is the part of the story that I think really reveals the full picture of what is happening here. She told the girlfriend, calmly and clearly, that if this pattern of behavior keeps happening she cannot stay in the relationship. That is a completely reasonable boundary. That is not an ultimatum born of cruelty. That is someone telling the truth about what they need and what they can sustain. And the response to that honest, measured, carefully communicated statement was the girlfriend banging her head on the car horn and saying she wanted to leave the earth. In 1 month of dating. After being told gently that meltdowns have consequences for the relationship. That escalation is not a trauma response. That is a manipulation tactic. And I want to be precise here because I think the word manipulation makes people picture someone cackling in a corner with a master plan. That is not what I mean. Whether this behavior is intentional or not, and I genuinely believe a lot of people do this without fully understanding what they are doing or why it works, the function of it is still manipulation. Because the moment you communicate a boundary and the other person responds by threatening to hurt themselves, or by saying something designed to make you feel directly responsible for whatever happens to them next, the entire dynamic of the conversation has shifted. You are no longer having a disagreement. You are now managing a crisis that you did not create and that you will be blamed for if it gets worse. That is a completely different situation, and it is one designed, consciously or not, to make you drop the boundary and focus entirely on the other person's pain. And our poster felt it. You can feel it in the way she wrote this post. The exhaustion in every sentence. The careful, measured way she describes everything, like someone who has been walking on eggshells long enough that careful and measured has become her default setting. She said she just wants to fade away from the relationship. Not storm out. Not have a big dramatic conversation. Not demand answers or accountability. Just quietly step back and let distance do the work, because she already instinctively knows that trying to leave the normal way is going to be a whole event in itself. And she was right to sense that, because the one time she mentioned wanting to leave, look at what immediately followed. The horn. The crying. The statements about wanting to leave the earth. Fading away would not work either, because this kind of relationship does not allow exits to be clean or quiet. I want to spend a real moment on how this must feel for someone living inside it day to day. You meet someone new. There is chemistry, there is probably laughter, there are almost certainly good moments because there always are in these situations, and no one would stay even a month if there were not something worth staying for. And then slowly, like a tide coming in, this other side of them starts appearing. And at first maybe you tell yourself it is stress, or it is a bad day, or both of you are still figuring out how you work together and things will smooth out once the relationship finds its rhythm. You extend grace because that is what decent people do. But then it keeps happening. And you start to dread getting together instead of looking forward to it. You start mentally preparing yourself on the drive over, running through what topics might set things off, rehearsing how to phrase things carefully. And eventually you get to where our poster is, bone-tired and quietly hoping that strangers on the internet will give her permission to believe what she already knows. Because our poster already knows. The edit at the end of the post says it all. She wrote, "Thanks for the replies. I feel bad for her, but it is not my baggage or my issues, and I will be breaking things off." That is not someone who needed new information. That is someone who needed to say it out loud somewhere safe and have people reflect it back to her. That is completely understandable, because when someone is crying and banging their head on a car horn and saying they want to leave the earth, walking away from that person feels cruel even when staying is the more dangerous choice. There is also something worth naming here about the physical safety dimension of this story, because I think it can get lost in all the emotional complexity. When someone takes a substance and then demands to drive, that is not just a relationship problem. That is a public safety issue. There are other people on those roads. There are people walking home from their own nights out. There are families in other cars who have no idea any of this is happening. And the fact that our poster held that line, even while being screamed at, even while being made to feel like the bad guy, even while watching someone she genuinely cares about completely unravel right in front of her, that took real backbone. A lot of people in that moment would have handed over the keys just to make it stop. Our poster did not. And that decision probably mattered more than she will ever know. The pattern is also worth examining through the lens of timing, because 1 month in is genuinely early. This is supposed to be the honeymoon phase. This is when people are typically on their best behavior, working to impress each other, showing only the parts of themselves they feel most confident about. The rough edges usually come later, once comfort sets in and the effort of performing starts to feel like too much work. If this is what month 1 looks like, with the screaming and the kicking and the horn and the statements about leaving the earth, you have to seriously ask yourself what month 6 looks like. What does a hard conversation look like at month 12? What does a genuine crisis, a job loss or a health scare or a family emergency, look like when you are 3 years in and you need your partner to be a steady and rational presence beside you? If someone cannot handle a sober girlfriend saying I should drive without turning it into a screaming emergency, they cannot be a partner through anything that actually counts. Let me be very clear about where I land on all of this. Our poster is not the problem here. Not even slightly. Wanting to drive when you are the sober one is not controlling behavior. Having a limit on how much emotional chaos you are willing to absorb is not cruelty. Deciding after 1 month that you are watching a pattern that will not improve on its own is not giving up too soon. It is being honest with yourself about what you are actually seeing, rather than what you hoped you would see. And what our poster is seeing is someone who is either deeply unwell and not yet in a place to take responsibility for managing it, or someone who has learned over a long time that extreme behavior produces results, or quite possibly both at once. None of those things make for a workable relationship, and certainly not at month 1. The trauma explanation deserves one final thought before we close this out. Even if everything the girlfriend says about her father is completely true, even if every one of her responses is 100% rooted in genuine unprocessed pain that she did not choose and does not fully understand, that is still not our poster's problem to fix. Loving someone does not obligate you to become the place where their unresolved wounds get worked out. Being compassionate does not mean accepting behavior that frightens you or endangers you or slowly hollows you out. You can feel genuine, deep, real sympathy for why someone became the way they are and still make the clear-eyed decision that you cannot build a life with them. Those two things are not in conflict. And sometimes recognizing that you cannot give someone what they actually need, that what they need is professional help and years of patient internal work that no girlfriend can substitute for, is the most honest and ultimately kind thing you can do. For yourself first. But for them too. Breaking up was the right call. Full stop. Walk away with your head up and do not look back. My MIL has had 12 flat tires in 3 months and my husband waited on that porch for nothing. She has had 12 flat tires in 3 months. 12. The same tire, on the same car, driven by the same woman who apparently cannot manage to see her 7-month-old grandchild but somehow manages to do laundry at her own mother's house 10 minutes away. Let me tell you about a mother-in-law named Cherry and a daughter-in-law who finally said enough. To understand why this situation is so layered, you need to understand who Cherry is, not just as a grandmother who keeps canceling, but as a mother. Because this is not a story about someone who tried and fell short. This is a story about someone who abandoned her firstborn son and is now trying to get a second act using that same son's baby. And our poster saw it from the very beginning. Our poster is in her early 20s, a first-time mom to a 7-month-old boy, and she is also dealing with postpartum depression and postpartum rage, which she mentions herself at the end of the post. And I want to hold that information carefully because she brings it up like it might invalidate her feelings. Like maybe she is overreacting because her emotions are heightened right now. But here is what I keep coming back to. Every single thing she describes about Cherry is documented, observable, and backed up by multiple other people who know this family. The postpartum conditions did not invent Cherry's pattern. They just made it harder to stay quiet about it. 12 flat tires. On the same car. In 90 days. I cannot stop thinking about this. Because each one of those flat tires represents a phone call, a text, a cancelled plan, a baby who will never know he was stood up but a mother who absolutely does. Each one of those excuses landed on a woman who was already exhausted, already sleep-deprived, already carrying the full physical and emotional weight of new motherhood, and had to absorb yet another disappointment on behalf of a child too young to feel it yet but old enough to need consistency. And Cherry just kept sending those texts. Kept offering those explanations. Kept expecting to be believed. Now let us talk about what Cherry actually said when this baby was born, because the way someone frames a new grandchild tells you a lot about their intentions. Cherry called this baby her second chance. Not "I am so happy for you both," not "I cannot wait to be part of this child's life." Her second chance. Meaning she is looking at this infant as an opportunity to rewrite her own story, to play the role of loving grandmother and devoted family woman, to post the pictures and get the social media validation of being a present and caring parent figure. Except she is not doing any of the actual work that role requires. She walked into that baby's life already thinking about what she would get out of it. Not what she could give. Not what this child needed. What she needed. That framing tells you everything before the story even begins. Our poster laid out the pattern clearly. Cherry promises to come over, then does not show. She texts at night saying she will be there in the morning, then comes up with a reason why she cannot. She has said she will be there every day to help with the baby, a promise that evaporated the moment it was made. And when she does show up, she shoves her phone in the baby's face to get content for her social media, so that to the outside world it looks like she is present and engaged. That detail hit me hard. Because it means the appearances matter more to Cherry than the actual relationship. She wants the optics of being a grandmother without putting in the time or the love that makes someone an actual grandmother. She wants the caption without the car ride over. She wants the comment section full of people telling her she is so wonderful without any of the middle-of-the-night worry, the rearranged schedule, the genuine investment that makes a grandparent someone a child actually knows and reaches for. And here is the part that connects all of this to something much deeper and much older. Our poster's husband sat on his grandmother's porch as a child, waiting for his mother to pick him up. She would call, she would make plans, she would describe all the fun things they would do together. and then she would not show. And he would wait. Imagine being that little boy. Imagine sitting on those porch steps, watching the end of the street, listening for a car that sounded like hers, telling yourself maybe she is just running late, maybe this time will be different. And then the light changing in the sky and still no car, and having to go back inside and explain to your grandmother why your mother did not come. Carrying that quietly, the way children carry things, folding it down small and learning not to expect too much. Cherry did that to her own little boy, over and over and over again, and apparently saw no reason to ever change. So why on earth would she be different with a grandchild she has even less obligation toward? The detail that her husband was never in Cherry's social media family photos while she posted pictures with her other children and her stepchildren and nieces and nephews, and our poster personally witnessed this because they have been together since high school. That is not just sad. That is a deliberate choice. You do not accidentally omit one specific child from years of family documentation. That is intentional erasure. Cherry curated a version of her family that did not include her firstborn son, and she posted that version publicly, repeatedly, for years, while he existed just outside the frame. And our poster watched it happen. She watched the man she loves be cropped out of his own mother's story again and again, and she said nothing, and she stayed patient, and she kept hoping Cherry would eventually step up. And Cherry never did. And now Cherry wants to use their baby to fill the frame. So when Cherry texted one morning claiming yet another flat tire, something in our poster finally broke open. And I think about what that moment must have felt like. Not just the anger, though the anger was certainly there, but the exhaustion underneath it. The particular heaviness of having given someone the benefit of the doubt so many times that you can no longer remember what it felt like to believe them. She had been holding space for Cherry's potential for months, hoping each promise would be the one that stuck. And then that text came in and something shifted, the way a bone finally sets after being slightly out of place for too long, and she said what needed to be said. She told Cherry she was tired of the empty promises. She pointed out that even when Cherry does show up, it is performative, it is for pictures, it is for the appearance of being present rather than the reality of it. And she told Cherry not to worry about them anymore. Which, honestly, is probably the clearest and most honest thing anyone has said to Cherry in a long time. Then our poster also mentioned the $500 Cherry owed her husband. And Cherry's response was to say she had already spent money on him as a kid, so she did not owe him anything. Gifts and food and clothes that a parent is supposed to provide for their child are not a debt the child carries into adulthood. That is not how any of this works. You do not get to cash in basic parental provision as credit against money you borrowed as an adult. That is absurd. That is someone reaching into the bare minimum of what parenthood requires and trying to use it as currency. And the audacity of that logic, the willingness to say it out loud, tells you that Cherry has never once been held accountable for how she treats this man. She has been making these calculations for years and no one has pushed back hard enough to make her stop. Cherry also said that her son would know she loved him when he grew up. And our poster said no, he will not know a thing about you. I want to talk about that moment because I think it is the emotional core of this entire story. It was not just a threat. It was a statement of values. Our poster is saying that love is not a feeling you announce on social media. It is not the words you say when you text someone at night promising to come over. Love is presence. Love is showing up. Love is not having 12 flat tires in 3 months as an excuse to avoid a 10-minute drive when you were already doing laundry at a house 10 minutes away. Love is not making a child wait on a porch every weekend until he eventually stops expecting you to come. And when Cherry invoked some future version of her son understanding her love, our poster saw through it immediately. Because she knows that child. She was there. She knows what he learned to live without. The postpartum depression and rage that our poster mentions does not make her wrong here. It may be making her more willing to say things out loud that she might otherwise have swallowed. But that does not mean those things do not need to be said. Sometimes the version of yourself that is running low on patience and high on clarity is the version that finally tells the truth that everyone else has been dancing around for years. Here is my verdict, and I am not going to soften it. Cherry is not a grandmother who is struggling to stay connected. She is a woman who abandoned her son, has been performing motherhood and family for social media for years while excluding him, borrowed money she had no intention of repaying, and is now trying to use an infant as a prop for her own emotional redemption. Our poster did the right thing by drawing a clear line. Not because she is cruel. Not because postpartum emotions clouded her judgment. But because she looked at the evidence, she looked at what Cherry has done to her husband his entire life, and she decided her son would not be the next person to sit on that porch waiting for someone who was never going to show up. Cherry can text all she wants. She can post about her love for her grandson on social media. She can tell anyone who will listen that she has tried. But trying looks like showing up. Trying looks like keeping your word. Trying looks like not borrowing money and then buying concert tickets. Our poster set a boundary that her son deserved, and she set it using the exact same logic Cherry has operated by for decades. You do not get credit for promises. You get credit for what you actually do. Do not let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting your child from patterns you have already watched destroy your husband's childhood. You saw it happen in real time. You know exactly who Cherry is. And so does he. Drop a comment below and tell me which story hit harder for you. And if you made it this far, a like and subscribe would mean everything.